How do you feel when you walk into a room full of strangers? Anxious? Uncomfortable? Do you scan the room looking for a familiar face just to make yourself feel a little more comfortable? Hey there, Johnny. How you doing?
All right.
Well, why is this? Why do we bristle at the thought of having to talk with people we don't know? Well, research shows that it turns out that speaking with strangers evokes a lot of the same emotions as getting up and doing public speaking. We wonder if that person will find us interesting. What will they think of us? Will they like what we have to say? In other words, we're vulnerable. Also, it's critical to become better at conversations. Why? Other than the fact that I'm going to be talking about that for the next 10 or 15 minutes, and you have to listen to me. We're all social beings. Conversations are what connects us to the world. Conversations are also a great way to share ideas, get inspired by new ideas. And in fact, every successful relationship you have, whether professional or personal, began with a conversation. Let's talk a little bit about the stages of conversations to understand how they evolve. Every conversation goes through 4 stages. The first is small talk. As I'm sure most of you are familiar with, the idea of small talk is sharing something about, hey, looks like it might rain, could snow in the mountains today, or, hey, what did you think about the game last night? Well, small talk is not just talking about current events, weather, or things going on around you. It's actually an opportunity to connect with the person, to figure out, do you have anything in common to continue the conversation going forward? So it's important beyond just sharing some simple ideas. And it actually leads to the second step of a conversation, which is fact disclosure. So fact disclosure is, as the name implies, where we reveal facts about what we're going to be talking about. You know, I love to ski is a fact, or I'm heading out on a ski trip next week. It's another fact. And what do facts do? Well, they give us content in which to continue carrying the conversation forward. So without understanding a little bit about that person, some facts, you can't move to the next level very successfully. If you go through the first 2 phases and you still have interest in talking with that person, we move into the third phase, which is really opinions and viewpoints. Excuse my handwriting. Opinions and viewpoints are where we begin to share more about ourselves. What do we feel about this? So for example, I might say, I love to ski. And I find I've been skiing for a long time. It really gets me to relax. And I find that is one of the most enjoyable things. That's my viewpoint. That's my opinion. But viewpoints and opinions aren't something you should start the conversation with. In fact, a conversation that jumps into viewpoints and opinions usually is one that you're turning and running away from. If you don't progress through the first 2 stages, viewpoints and opinions are usually out of place. And even more so, the last phase, which is just personal feelings. So personal feelings go even deeper than viewpoints. It's how you feel about something. I can't stand those irksome snowboarders ubiquitously going down the mountain, plowing the good snow out of the way. That's my personal feelings. It gets you a little more insight on that person, what they're feeling and what they're thinking. You know, every conversation, every successful conversation, progresses through all 4 of these stages. It doesn't always happen in one encounter. It can happen over several encounters, but they all go through that progression. The other thing to keep in mind in a conversation is be positive. When you enter into a conversation, feel like you have something of value to contribute, and that they have something of value to contribute to you. If you enter into that with that open mindset, you will get something of value out of every conversation. Additionally, make sure that as you go into a conversation, you're helping the person talk. So make it about them. People love to talk about themselves. You may even offer a compliment. Hey, I love that purse. Did you just get that recently? Or, you know, I noticed that you're at this conference Here, what are your purposes here? Are you like science? Okay, so make it about them. Ask them questions, get them involved, and get them to talk about their personal interests. That will help you evolve the conversation. So, if you think about conversations, they don't have to be intimidating and scary. Just like public speaking, if you keep in mind the 4 phases of a conversation, being open-minded, making it about them, you can become a more successful conversation. So at this point, I'd like to bring up Matt, and this part of the project we're going to do we're going to do a little role play, and so what we're doing is we're setting a stage. I set the scene with Matt earlier, so we haven't rehearsed this at all, but I've just told him we're meeting at a conference. So imagine a conference, and there's a break in the conference, and there's a little schmoozing going on, right? You're grabbing some food, whatever, and having a conversation. Obviously, I know Matt, but we're going to pretend like we haven't met, and we're at a small business conference. So that's the setting.
It's a pretty boring conference.
How's it going? Huh? I don't believe we've met. My name is Zach.
Oh, hey Zach. My name's Matt Pepe.
Ah, Matt, nice to meet you. So what brings you to this conference?
Well, it's kind of had to go. It's involved in my work, and it's an area of interest that my boss has, and he feels that one of the employees need to go and become sort of an expert on the topic, and here I am. I have the spare time.
Oh, what do you do for work?
Me? I am a animal researcher. I research the types of hormones and smells that animals give off and how we track each other. And it's a little bit rare, especially since this conference is about computer science. But we use a lot of computers when we're doing our research, and so I thought it would be helpful to learn about this.
Oh, interesting. So you work as a scientist and in computers, or do you focus mostly on the animal aspect?
I focus more on animals. It's the necessity of technology and the advantage that it brings that causes me to use the computers, but I'm more of an animal person.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Have you had any interesting findings or breakthroughs in your research?
Well, we did. We did a lot of research into ants and the way they colonize and work together. And what we found is little ants, everyone thinks it's their little tentacles that are talking. No, it's really they have smell sensors on the edge of their tentacles. And they can detect the scent of each other, and that's how they're communicating. It's not by means of their antenna or anything like that.
Oh.
So most people don't know that.
No.
Did you?
No, I didn't know that. I did have a Toastmaster meeting one time where someone talked about Toastmasters being like ants.
Not many people speak about this.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about ants, but definitely would be interested in talking to you more about it.
Sure, I can give you my business card if you would like, and you can contact me later, and maybe we can meet tonight for a drink or something.
Yeah, after the conference, that'd be fantastic. I'd love to hear a little more about your research. There could be an opportunity. I'm working on some stuff as well in a similar area, so there may be opportunities to talk about mutual interesting ideas.
Oh, what area are you researching?
Oh, I do. I work for different clients. I'm a consultant, and I'm helping a company right now understand behaviors in different animals. They're trying to develop an app for animals.
Yeah, I think we have a lot in common. And then the computer science lecture, what's the connection with the technology computer the conference that we're at?
Just trying to understand a little more about technology and how it can enable better solutions to some interesting problems that people are trying to solve.
Right. At 4 o'clock, there's a speech about developing apps for the Android. You might want to check that out.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's a great idea. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Nice to meet you.
Hey, nice to meet you too, Zach.
Here's my business card.
Great. Here's mine.
Thank you, Brandon. So, just for the last 2 or 3 minutes here, what we do is just have an informal discussion. And this is an opportunity, this is going to be our table topics for the day probably, just to get some feedback, comments, suggestions on the, not necessarily on the speech, but the speech was a background obviously to the discussion. Things we could have done better, things that were maybe good. Just have a conversation. And to either of us, and it can be a conversation.
Just just an observation I had when you both were speaking. It didn't come up in your presentation portion, Zach, but one definitely dominated the conversation over the other. And I know, like in some previous classes I've taken for improv, it was usually kind of the lead speaker, and I guess I kind of call it high and low in the roles. So I was wondering if that ever switches at all. Like, I know that you were kind of the one that was asking all the questions, and Matt was really being the respondent.
That was sort of my fault. I guess I didn't really think about exactly what we're going to be doing here, and I came into the situation thinking that I would be more subservient. But as we were going through, I was starting to realize that, oh, Zach probably wants me to take more of a participatory part in this conversation. And that's when I started asking him about his research.
At the end, it did switch, but I would actually comment, and I did talk a little about in the speech, to get that common interest, right? Because I don't know anything about him.
Yeah.
I'm asking a lot of fact-finding questions. So we didn't get too much into, we did a little bit of viewpoint, a little bit, nothing that personal. We stayed in the little bit of small talk, what brings you to the conference, and then went right into the fact-finding. And I wanted him to express facts so I could actually find that common interest. You typically only get a few minutes with a person to find that interest, and then it separates, right? Especially at a conference.
Yep.
That's a good observation.
Yeah, it would have been hard to cover all four.
Yeah, and like I said, not every interaction has to cover all four.
And if Zach is kind of shy and quiet, it's nice to have somebody that will talk about himself and be a bit narcissistic.
Actually, I think he did a great job because he started giving me facts that were very easily to hook onto and connect to. Because if he didn't give me much, and I was trying to ask open-ended questions, you can ask some closed-ended questions, or like yes, no, and open-ended, right, more discussion type. So if you can ask more of those, you get more interaction.
And that's a common mistake I often make, is I ask very yes/no questions of people. And my conversations die very quickly.
That's actually worth exploring. What are the type? You don't want to ask a yes or no question. You want to ask an open-ended question. Right?
Yeah. So questions like what, how, why are open-ended questions. Did you or are you is kind of a yes/no.
Where did I just read that? Did you send that to me? Yeah, all the W questions.
But I thought that it was obviously entertaining, and it was smooth, and it explored or went through those items that you identified earlier fairly well. It was a good display. And you really can't go wrong, because even if Matt was very closed-mouthed about his background, it would invite you to explore a little bit more, or with small talk, or go to someone else.
And I actually made a faux pas, because I jumped right into a number 4 in the very first question. He asked me why I'm here, and I said, well, I'm at this boring conference, I don't really want to be here. And that is a turnoff to someone if they go, wow, this guy, I just met him, and he's already telling me that he's unhappy about being here. So that was definitely my typical faux pas when I'm at a party. I do that all the time.
Good comments. That's our time, but thank you guys very much. Great feedback.
All right.